Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our solid waste management subgroup meeting, focusing in on technology options for the state of Connecticut and what to do with our municipal solid waste as we go forward. It is November 17th. It is a Thursday. We're convening the meeting at 10:04. Just so everyone knows, I have a hard stop at 11. So we normally try to keep these things to an hour in respect for everyone's meeting and agenda for the day, for the rest of their schedule. So that being said, if there's still Q&A going on, we're not going to pull the plug. Gaia will stick with it. And I'm going to go down to the future presenter and upcoming meeting right now, just in case I have to leave. So the next presenter is going to be EQ Tech, and that's going to be December 15th, same time, 10 o'clock. That's our next regularly scheduled meeting, so that we can get that out of the way. I do not see either of my other co-chairs yet. That would be Senator Formica and Senator Minor. So I have made my comments, and we're going to go right to the presentation by WinWaste. We have their senior VP, Mike O'Friel, here, and also Jim O'Brien is the man behind the curtain running the show. And I will leave it to Mike and to Jim. Thank you for joining us.
Right, and thank you, for the opportunity to present to this group. We appreciate it, and because I am technically challenged, Jim is going to help me move forward with the presentation. So thank you, Jim, for that. And just by way of introduction, my name is Mike O'Friel. I'm the Senior Vice President and General Counsel at WinWaste Innovations. I also manage our government affairs as well. So today I want to provide you a few ideas about how the state's waste and recycling industry can help provide more organic waste processing and diversion solutions, and therefore handle more waste in state, and some additional legislative actions that might create additional incentives for developing those solutions. So Jim, if you go to slide 2, so most of you are probably familiar with WinWaste. I'll just give very quick background on our company. WinWaste is the result of a merger of a number of different companies, including Wheelabrator, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and City Carting. Both of those companies have been involved in the waste industry for many years in Connecticut. So in addition to the Lisbon and Bridgeport waste energy facilities, we've got an ash monofil in Putnam. We've got a recycling facility in Stamford. We operate transfer stations in Stamford, Norwalk, and Milford. We've got collection operations out of Stamford and Norwalk, and we operate 6 municipal transfer stations. So a lot of expertise and assets and infrastructure, within the state of Connecticut. I want to talk about primarily, as I mentioned at the outset, what we can do as an industry to help the state advance the organics recycling within Connecticut. And the framework of the organics recycling is the Commercial Organics Recycling Law, which was originally adopted in 2014. And Connecticut was one of the first states to have an organics recycling law. So really at the forefront of organics recycling. And it's really intended to encourage development of residual recycling facilities by making sure that there's sufficient feedstock available, sufficient organics material available for potential processing facilities. And therefore, if there's feedstock, then the processing facilities will be developed. And the food waste is about 22% of the total waste disposed of in Connecticut, according to a 2015 study by Deep. That study obviously is a little dated at this point, so the numbers may be probably higher now or maybe higher now than they were back in 2015. One of the issues about moving forward with this law is that there is not sufficient composting organics facilities within the state to handle the volume, and because the way the law is structured, it limits the requirement to source separate organics to businesses that have a processing facility within a 20-mile radius of that business. And because of that radius requirement, there's many areas of Connecticut that are exempt from the law, and therefore significant sources of organic waste are not being captured. There has been some recent progress within Connecticut, as many of you know. The law was amended recently to include more businesses within the framework of the law by reducing the volume of material that's required, that's generated by a business from 52 tons annually to 26 tons, and therefore trying to capture more businesses within the scope of the law. And there was recently announced the $5 million in sustainable material grants to 15 municipalities to develop programs for organics recycling within the state. And recently there was a food waste facility that was opened in Berlin. So definitely progress in moving forward in developing not only feedstock, but also processing facilities. But I think more needs to be done. The gap clearly is still more feedstock for potential processing facilities and the development of more facilities. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg, which comes first? You need the feedstock in order to have developers construct the facilities, or you need the facilities and then the feedstock will come. And I think that's been part of the problem is I think you need to do both, and they have to be in parallel. I think there's a lot that the existing waste and recycling industry can provide to help close the gaps. And we at Win Waste have been looking at potentially organic solutions. So some of the things that we've been looking at is co-locating organics facilities at our waste energy facilities. We've also discussed with our existing customer base how to provide solutions, including on-site solutions that would allow them to process organics at their facility as opposed to hauling it to a more distant processing facility. And of course, we have the infrastructure to support hauling residuals from generators to processing facilities. So some of the technologies, one of the things also that the industry brings is we've got the expertise and experience to identify and develop what are really commercially viable technologies that are going to work and actually provide solutions. And some of the examples we're looking at, so we've been working with a company that does organics extrusion pressing. What that means is they'll take either source separated waste or even just straight MSW, press it, and extract the liquids from that material. And then we can process the residual material, and then the liquids either go to an AD facility that would be at a transfer station if we had the facility there, or at an offsite AD facility, or potentially an AD facility at a waste energy facility if we had this extraction equipment on the site of our waste energy facility. One of the other technologies we're looking at is a generator located system that takes food waste and turns it into an inert material that can then be used mixed with the compost or fertilizer. And the benefits of this type of system is that it sits at the generator. And currently it's in a development stage, and the technology or the equipment that we're looking at can handle up to 300 pounds of material, organic material per day, but they're looking to upscale that to up to 1,000 pounds of material per day. And I think with our customer base, we'll be able to work with our customers to locate that equipment on their site and actually do the processing right on site. So I know the Organics Collection and Diversion Group that was part of the Sustainable Materials Management Coalition looked at made a number of recommendations in order to increase the organics processing within the state. And they focused first on and we support many of those recommendations. One of the first ones was to focus on the commercial generators. And we think that's a key step that needs to move forward. It's not just on the municipality side, but also on the generators, because they have most of the feedstock. And secondly, we support the recommendation to develop more infrastructure. One of the ways to do that is through fixed contracts, and not only for electricity, in connection with an anaerobic digester, but also long-term waste contracts. And finally, private-public partnerships. We think that is important. If you think about how the waste energy industry was developed within the state, it was based on a public-private partnership, a coalition of the industry bringing the technology and the expertise, and the public bringing those long-term contracts, both on the waste side and on the energy side, as well as providing sites to develop these facilities. So some of the recommendations that we think would make sense in order to accelerate organics diversion would be grants to generators to acquire these on-site digesters that I just talked about, as well as to developers to support building and siting these processing facilities. Tax credits, again, to developers that would incentivize them to develop the facilities. Subsidies, not only to municipalities, but also to generators to pay for the cost of organics diversion and processing. And then to also help offset hauling costs if it's required to go to a further processing facility beyond the 20-mile radius. And finally, as I said, the private-public partnerships, I think, are key to this. We haven't really developed in a lot of detail any of these legislative initiatives, but we think all of them are, there are models for all of them in other states, or certainly in other sectors, that I think were put in place to drive public policy. And I think any of these are ones that could work in the state of Connecticut to move the organics diversion forward more rapidly than it has thus far.
That's it, Mike?
That's it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if it was my ears or everyone else's ears. Well, thank you for the presentation. I think I could speak for the majority of people on the call, and short and sweet is music to our ears. I have a couple of questions right out of the gate. Well, thank you, first of all, for paying attention to the laws that we recently passed to try to encourage the food diversion. Speaking just personally, I'm not a big fan of mandating things. I think of making it both financially and environmentally appeasing is more of the way to go. But I'm not saying I'm never going to mandate something if it's necessary. But this seems to indicate that you have capacity at existing plants that Wind Waste operates in Connecticut to accommodate at least a food diversion plan. And would Wind Waste entertain the idea of doing something along these lines at the now shuttered Mira location in Hartford?
Yeah, we would definitely consider that. Again, I think in order to make sure that it's financially viable, I think we would hope that there'd be some type of support to do that. But yes, we'd certainly consider that.
So in the meantime, and just for putting a point in the map or a pin in the, one of the issues that has come up as far as the former Mira plant goes was technology upgrades and maintenance over the years. Now, what has Wind Waste been doing or has done to upgrade their technology going or in the past and going forward? Because I've checked with Deep, and at least the facility down in Bridgeport has consistently met its exhaust parameters going in the recent past. And we'd like to keep that up, but in the same breath, you did mention a fixed kilowatt per hour cost going forward, and I'm afraid wind waste is going to eventually say this just doesn't make sense for us going forward, and see you later. So I know there's a lot in that question, but go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and you're talking specifically about the Bridgeport Waste Energy Facility. Yeah, I mean, we intend to operate that facility for a number of years. We've worked with the state and the legislature to provide additional support for that through the RPS program, and that's helped given the fact that we don't have long-term power purchase agreements anymore, and the power purchase price since that time historically has been much lower than it was under those contracts. So that support has been very much appreciated. We continue to invest in those facilities. We continue to make sure that they operate in compliance with law, operate at their full permitted capacity. We think as long as you invest in those facilities, they'll have an infinite life. And, our plan is to stay in Connecticut and continue to operate that facility for the long term. We do not see any scenario that we would decide to close that facility. That's just not on the horizon.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. I didn't want to monopolize all of the questions. If anyone else has a question or a comment, please, raise your hand in the Zoom call. Anyone? Bueller? Well, then I'm going to. I don't know, Dave Stuber. Don Stein just saved you, Dave. Don, yeah, your hand is raised. Please ask your question.
No, I think the question, and Dave probably would ask the same question, but I don't want to put words in his mouth. When you look at the South Meadows facility, there's a lot of discussion, controversy over what should become of that facility, that area. So, I don't think you can make an assumption that it's going to be available for further waste processing. I mean, that's something that has to be discussed. But the impression I also got from the presentation was that the number of tons you were talking about was not as significant as I would have expected. When you look at the percentage of organic waste and how you gather that organic waste, and whether it's industrial, commercial, or domestic, I think that's been one of the cornerstones of what DEEP has been trying to do, was to look at separating organic waste and reducing the waste stream. And the numbers you talked about, if I'm correct, were not as significant as I would have expected. So I guess 2 points. You can't assume that the South Meadows is going to be converted, although there's a lot of us who think it might be a good idea, but there's also an equal contingency that don't like the idea. And then, what are you looking at in terms of volume of processing?
Yeah, to the first point, that our first preference would obviously not be there. And I to develop a facility on that site, it would be to look at one of our sites and co-locate a processing type facility at one of our sites if we could. And I understand that site may not be available. To the extent it was available and it made sense for us to do it, we'd certainly consider that. On the second point, the volume of organics, to be honest, that surprised me a little bit too. And we're relying on the 2015 waste characterization study by DEEP. Those numbers come directly from that study. So I don't, my assumption is that those numbers may be higher now than they were, just because the volume of waste, it's a percentage of, they're assuming that some of that, a percentage of the total waste stream is organics. Presumably, if the total volume of MSW within the state is increased, and that percentage of organics, or that amount of organics would increase proportionally. So it's a good question in terms of what's out there. I mean, we do know that I think there is more waste out there that's being processed. Just because I think a lot, our sense is that there are generators who are exempt from the law given the way it's currently drafted. So it would be obviously to develop one of these facilities, you'd have to make sure the feedstock was there, and that is a critical component. I think what we're saying is that if the proper incentives are in place to produce that feedstock, then I think it would you would have a better sense in terms of how much waste stream is there and what type of facility you need to process it. So, for example, if this process that I talked about, which allows a generator to process material on site, that may be a better solution than developing a standalone processing facility, because that may be more appropriately sized for the type of waste that's going to get generated, as opposed to building a separate and a larger facility. So that type of equipment would work well, even in a situation where you had a much smaller amount of feedstock than you might need to otherwise support a much larger processing facility.
Yeah, the other part of that question then becomes, are you looking at trying to do some kind of separation at your facility, or would you expect the haulers to make the capital investment to either add trucks or to modify their trucks so that now instead of 2 waste streams, they carry 3?
Yeah, and that's part of it. I mean, there's different solutions. So the other solution I talked about was the organic press, which you don't have to do source separation. That's kind of the benefit of that system, where you don't have to do that part up front. But if you were going to have source separated, I think it's one of the components I think that we would need to make sure is that there are incentives for the haulers to have that type of equipment, do that source separation. So I think that's part of what I'm suggesting is, depending on the solution, you would have to tailor some of those incentives to make sure that it made economic sense for the industry to pursue those.
Thank you. And I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mike. We've been joined by our chairman of the committee, Senator Needleman. Just wanted to give him the opportunity to say a few words or ask a few questions. Good morning, Norm.
Good morning, Joe. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for participating. Obviously, a busy morning with the electric rates being announced in about 10 minutes. So I apologize for being late, and I'm sorry I missed your presentation, Mike. Maybe we could talk about it later.
Yeah, happy to do that, Senator.
Yeah, I caught the part about the South Meadows, the brief conversation about the South Meadows. I'm not sure that that's going to ever be repurposed for anything to do with trash at this point. So it doesn't mean that somewhere near there couldn't be some facility, but I doubt that one is even on the table. I'm glad to hear that you guys are committed to keeping the plant operating. So that's at least a positive step.
Yeah, fully committed. No doubts about that.
Good. How does the value of the energy impact the viability of that operation?
So it's changed over time. Right now, more of the revenue from those facilities comes from the tip fees and from the energy. So it's kind of flipped. It used to be about 60% energy, 40% on the tip fees. Now it's going to flip the other way, where it's about 60, maybe even more than that, 65% from the tip fees, about 35% from the energy, given energy rates.
Okay. Yeah, and we don't know where energy rates are going. So
no. I mean, and I think we've seen some recent increase, but it's hard to predict that. This seemed to be what we're seeing is that our view is that there's more of a short-term issue than the long-term issue. So.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And let's plan on talking a little bit
Sure.
more.
Yeah, sure.
And thank you, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. Anyone else with any questions? Hand up in the chat box. If not, I'm going to go back to Dave Stuber and not to put you on the spot, but we are presuming certain things about the South Meadows location, and I completely understand we've done this for 40 years. It's somebody else's turn to take over, but I just was hoping that you can explain to or the city of Hartford's position, not permanent position, but what we're looking at right now. I'm not asking you to put a pin in the map at this point, but just to make everyone clear about where you stand.
Sure.
You went up.
Thanks, Representative. Sorry, I was muted there. Appreciate that, Representative. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk about the subject. Yeah, I mean, just I don't want to speak too long on this, but just to kind of give a little bit of context to everybody on the call, kind of how we view the site. You recall that not only is Hartford home to the site of the now closed Mira plant, but we're also home to the landfill that was long used to meet the solid waste needs of Central Connecticut up in the North Meadows of Hartford. So a substantial portion of Hartford's riverfront property in the form of that landfill in the North Meadows has already been kind of permanently sacrificed to the solid waste needs of past generations. Which is considerably valuable property that might have been put to some other purpose, but is now kind of permanently despoiled. And so when we think about the South Meadows property, there's a no small amount of reluctance on the part of the people of Hartford to kind of think about continuing to consign riverfront property in the capital city to an ongoing use of this kind. Now that being said, so we have hopes to see the property potentially redeveloped for a variety of purposes, and so we'd like to explore what types of uses the property might be suitable for. We don't have hard, drawn conclusions on that front. Now, this doesn't mean to say that we're entirely averse to the idea of having some type of smaller scale solid waste facility somewhere in Hartford, either on the Mira property or potentially somewhere else in the city. We're not averse to being part of a regional and statewide solution to these issues, but we're certainly not looking to just immediately jump to redeveloping the current property for a comparable use. And we'd definitely like to look at exploring alternative, potentially higher economic benefit uses to the riverfront land. Also to say that's something we're definitely going to be looking to all of our partners in state government for, and to our fellow communities throughout Central Connecticut, is just some appreciation for the need to have the Mira property properly remediated, so that there are options for development of various different kinds on the property. This is an asset that served the solid waste needs of over 50 towns over the course of over 3 decades, and so we're hopeful that some meaningful state resources will become available in order to conduct a thorough environmental evaluation of the property and look at a reuse that could add to the city's economy, tax rolls in a variety of different ways. So we're look forward to exploring those options in partnership with the state and our neighboring communities as we move ahead. And toward that end, I'll just add, as Don also knows, that there is a bit of a kind of a reserve nest egg that Mira has accrued over the course of time through years when some of the energy sales went well. And our conversations on the Mira board have been along the lines of holding that nest egg in reserve, so that eventually when Mira's assets do redound to the state, that those monies could be available for at least a part, evaluation and remediation of the mirror plant site. However, it's quite likely that won't be alone by sufficient by itself. Probably better to think of it more as a down payment. So I hope that's at least I hope that gives some light as to how we're thinking about the property and what we're hoping to see happen in Hartford.
Thank you, Dave. We have a question from Jason Manafort. Jason, thank you.
Thank you. Question regarding, maybe it's a question for one of the DEP people on the call here. The current permit for the facility, the mirror facility, the permit still active? I guess that's my question. We know the facility's closed, but that permit is active? Current permit that's active?
That permit is currently active. It has not been requested to be closed yet.
So the plant in theory could run again today. That plant started up today, it could do that. Or it could be amended. The permit could be amended. The facility could be modified. Those are all things that could happen.
The permit could be modified upon application for a modification that would require them to go through, a technical review, et cetera.
Sure. Standard stuff.
It could happen. Mira had actually submitted an application for modification, which has since been withdrawn. So there isn't anything pending before DEEP at this time.
Okay, but the permit is currently active.
It is.
Thank you. That was my question.
Thank you.
I'll just add there's a closure plan that's pending approval before DEEP right now for the overall facility.
There is that. Mira has notified us of their cessation of activities, and they have submitted a closure plan. The department has requested additional information on that closure plan. Once that's received, we'll continue our technical review of their closure plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jennifer. We have a little bit of time left. Here we go. Frank, save me here. Frank has a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the chairs. I think this is a great conversation again, and I think just to kind of go bigger picture, as we work together as a task force and our subgroups, I think one of the goals is to come up with some actionable items to bring back from these groups. And I think one overarching theme that I've kind of gleaned from several of these meetings is some inconsistency and maybe some aged data around the waste streams. And if we are to truly have a meaningful conversation around the future of the waste, I think we should understand exactly what the current situation is and what actually makes up these streams. We are relying, I believe that's accurate, as Mike pointed out, on the 2015 waste characterization study. I do think that an update of that characterization study is warranted, and I believe was part of DEEP's plan to do so in their last materials management plan. So I think that in order for us to all be confident that we're making the correct decisions for the future and to guide us into a way that we could all feel confident that we have the best and most recent data available, we need to push for an updated waste characterization study. And my suggestion would also be that we look at this at a more granular and regional or local level throughout the state, because from my experience, I'm sure Jason and others from the industry can speak to it. What the waste looks like in New London is a lot different than it looks like in Salisbury. And it's a lot different than what it is in Hartford. And it's different in Hartford than it is in Old Lyme and Stonington. And so it may sound silly for some of you that are not in the industry on a daily basis, but if we really want to solve for issues on how we manage our waste the best way moving forward, we really need to understand what's in that waste container. So if we're looking at a characterization study from 2015, likely The waste was coming from 2014 when the study was started. So we're almost 10 years old on this study. If you put on top of that the COVID-19 pandemic that has totally changed the way all of us live and work, I think updating that kind of information just makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for that point. James Albus with a question or a hand up.
Thank you, Representative Gresco. And I just wanted to expand on Frank's comments. My office manages the data, the solid waste data for the state of Connecticut. And I've been looking at waste characterization studies, not only ours, of course, but regionally and nationwide. And I agree that it's probably the right time to do an updated waste characterization study. That being said, what I have seen in my research is that even the studies that have been done more recently have not changed in other states in terms of the previous waste characterization studies that they've done, maybe in the late 2000s, early 2010s, versus the more recent ones. So they've been relatively similar. And that's even the case for a state like Wisconsin, which did a waste characterization study following the start of the global pandemic. And they found that the results were relatively comparable to their 2009 waste characterization study. So I don't want to suggest that we shouldn't use the 2015 data to give us some high level direction. I still think it's appropriate to do so, but we'll certainly get some more granular information with a new study. But the 2015 data should be appropriate to use for some high level policy planning. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I don't see any other hands up in the room, but you know what? I'm going to spitball a little bit here and go back to Dave. And let me just give you a scenario of potential tipping fee guarantees for the city of Hartford, potential energy generation profits from a facility in Hartford. Would that be entertained by the city? I mean, if we could say something to the effect of the city of Hartford would not have to pay a tipping fee, or the energy generated from whatever technology is decided upon in legislation next year, that energy would offset city of Hartford residents' energy going down that path. Is that something that we should not be bothered with at this point, or would it be something that the administration would entertain?
Those are interesting ideas, Representative, and kinds of ideas that, to be honest, I hadn't really contemplated previously. I wouldn't want to immediately comment on the kind of reaction that would get from the mayor, from our council members, but that's certainly it's an interesting type of concept that we could kick around a bit over here and discuss further. I suppose I'll say we wouldn't be opposed to having conversations along those lines at the outset, at the very least. Okay, thank you. And again, I don't see any other hands raised in the room. I'm going to go out on a limb again. I might pose one question for the group. Just in general, one thing I wonder is, as I watch today's presentation, as we talk about organics and different elements of the waste stream, and for what it's worth, I mean, the idea of updating our the information on the types of waste that we have in the state certainly doesn't strike me as a bad idea. But I do wonder about the extent to which it might be possible to or feasible technically to have mechanical separation of waste streams to kind of keep with the sort of the single stream, if you like, kind of culture that we already have for recyclables and everything else. I wonder to what extent this might be, how we might be able to identify whether or not that type of technology is out there and feasible to integrate into. any number of the different, solutions that might be constructed or entertained in terms of how that was processed after being separated. But it's something that I remain kind of curious about in general. And maybe we don't have an answer for that on this call, but I think it's something that would be worth continuing to think about in future sessions.
Yeah, sure. So the technology you're asking about is to deal with source separated material or not?
The technical feasibility of having just a mixed stream of like residential solid waste just kind of coming in, and how feasible would be to have that kind of automatically separated by machine or something to that effect, into like pulling out organics and sort of separating portions of the waste stream out, so as to for instance, the long-term practice at the mirror plant, right, was you'd have a magnet that would pull bits of metal out of the incoming waste stream. I mean, could we have like a AI driven type process that would pull organics out of a waste stream like that? Is that in any way feasible?
Yeah, I know someone has maybe someone a bit more technical expertise. I mean, I think that just going back to the technology we talked about, which is not separating the material through some type of AI, although I think that capability is probably there. The system that we're looking at just takes raw MSW, compresses it, gets the liquid out, so you don't have to do any source separation. That to me is the benefit of that technology, because you avoid all that front end work, and you can just take the MSW as it comes in. So I think there are solutions for that, one way or the other. So you avoid the source separation, if that's what your question was up front.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike, and Mark Van Wielden. You had your hand raised.
Yeah, just wanted to answer that question a little bit further. I think you're talking about, source separation on the front end of any facility. Sometimes in the industry, they call that a dirty MRF. We don't like that term, but that technology is out there in a variety of ways, to where the trash can come in. There's several different types of separation processes, and to include organics. And there's other screening that can get the sand and gravel and grit out, and break everything down to its best use possible. It's very expensive as an upfront process on a cost per yard, but it's being done in other locations by other companies. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mark. Jeff Martirano.
Yeah, I think Mark covered most of the points I was going to make, but I'll just kind of elaborate a bit more. So a lot of those, they used to be called dirty MRFs. They're called mixed waste processing facilities now. A lot of them that do operate commercially are found out on the West Coast in California, where there's heavy subsidies that support the economics of those facilities. There are some that have been attempted on the East Coast, particularly in markets where there aren't well-developed recycling programs. There's an infamous one down in Georgia that failed recently, but typically the economics make it such that it's not really economically feasible because of the costs on that front end separation process itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And again, I do not see any. Oh, here we go. Oh, that's just a one there. I don't see any other hands raised as far as a question goes. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time to. Oh, here we go, Jason.
Sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. Just for the record or whatever, the mirror plant that had operated all these years was what they call an RDF plant, which means they process the MSW before it's burned, right? They make it resource derived fuel is what the RDF stands for. They magnet it, they trommel it, all these things you're talking about doing on the front end of that process, they were doing, just for the record. They didn't call it a dirty MRF. It wasn't really that process. It was the RDF process to get the MSW in the form to inject it into the boilers. It's different than a mass burn than the rest of the plants in Connecticut. But a lot of these things you're talking about were being done there. They made fines, they recovered the metals. It was being done.
Thank you, Jason. Commissioner Dykes, thanks for joining us for our meeting today, and please enlighten us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And glad to be on. Sorry, I was a little delayed joining, but I understand this may have already been mentioned at the top of the hour, but I think we're really excited about the grant program that we've launched with the support from the legislature and the governor's budget and the sustainable materials management grants. Now 15 municipalities that are moving forward. We're excited about what we're going to learn from the pilots that are being deployed about the feasibility and the cost effectiveness and the participation rates that we'll see for residential customers participating in source separation of household organics. Also was glad to join a meeting about 2 weeks ago with the Connecticut Restaurant Association and a number of other restaurants and others that have been receiving free technical assistance from the Center for Eco-Technology through Reduce Waste CT initiative, also funded by the SWM grants, where we're working with those commercial generators of significant amounts of organics to help them implement, cost-saving diversion programs or even food waste reduction programs in their businesses. So we're learning a lot from those insights, and I think it's really important, as I think the focus of this task force has been a lot on the CapEx side of sort of the gray infrastructure solutions that can solve for diversion and recycling and materials management, that we also are comparing some of the costs of those possible solutions as we discuss how to finance them and so on and so forth against the cost effectiveness of investing in programs and working with haulers and municipalities to help customers begin to source separate on site. We know that generally will produce more higher quality recoverable materials. So just something to point out, and we have these sort of experiments actively underway, and so we'll be glad to share some of those insights as we get them. Also want to just note on those, as we've been talking about these different incentives and ways to solve for organics diversion. About a week and a half ago, I was down in Berlin, and we have a new facility that just opened up there, Bright Feeds, which is, I'm not sure if this has been mentioned as well, but a business that started, I think, maybe inspired from some of the conversations that came through the CCSMM webinars that I know you participated on many of those, Rep. Gresco. And so this is a facility that's going to be able to process up to 450 tons per day of organics to convert into an animal feed product, which is really high up on our solid waste hierarchy that's in statute, and they're going to be able to offer low to no tip fees for accepting those materials. No public subsidy that I'm aware of for that business, but hosted, built right here in the center part of the state. So, I think it's exciting to see how the market is moving and some of these different solutions that are emerging. And we're eager to share what we're learning here at DEEP and working in partnership with municipalities through the SWM grants to kind of compare to other, capital investments that we could support to help increase diversion. So glad to be part of the conversation. I know my team's been on as well. And these are really important and timely topics. So thanks for guiding these conversations.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we're going to go back to Dave Stuver to take us home.
Thanks, Representative. It's interesting what the commissioner just said about Brave Feeds. I actually happened to have a conversation with an executive over at that company, and they are an interesting an operation that I think it might be worthwhile for this group to have a conversation or perhaps a presentation for most folks. From how they explain their process to me, they do require a certain level of kind of a purity in their incoming feedstock, because they need to hit a certain target carbohydrate and protein content targets in order to take their organic waste and turn it into suitable animal feed products. And so that again raises the question of, okay, well, how are we source separating the waste out? I think that a lot of their waste streams are it's easier for them to kind of get like a direct incoming feedstock, say from a grocery store or food type business that already has that separated. But that type of reuse, and imagining that there might be a constellation of different solutions to how we process organics, is part of what motivates my earlier question about potential mechanical separation of waste. And I guess like one question for the community to consider as we evaluate all these different technology options going forward is whether it makes sense to have some type of like uniform process for sort of separating out different streams that can then be pipelined into various different technical solutions, or whether or not that sort of separation is best done at the site of a particular facility that would then be processing the waste. Obviously, there's different cost considerations to take into account in any one of those different scenarios, but since we're still at this kind of early stage of imagining what might be possible, it's just something to think about and consider. And then my other thought was just in response to what Jason said before about the mirror plant. It is true that there was this as you described, there's this waste processing component of the mirror process kind of up front. And the idea back then was that the theory back in the mid 80s was that if you took the incoming waste in and you ground it up, for lack of a more artful term, before you fed it into the incinerator, that would result in a cleaner burn, more efficient use of fuel, et cetera. The consensus view that's been reflected to me by others on the Mirror board and on the staff side of operation of the plant is that didn't really necessarily pan out as well as was hoped when it came to actual operation of the facility, which is, I suppose, a cautionary tale to some degree about getting too enamored of the potential benefits of untested technologies. But it was a process that was in place there. However, it was not something that involved pulling out or separation of organics at all. As Jason accurately said, magnets were used to pull metals out of the waste stream, but organics were kind of included with the rest of everything else that ended up getting ground up there. So it was just some comments on those subjects that I just wanted to make for the record.
Thank you, Dave. And as I said, in the interest of everyone's time, we're going to wrap it up here. Again, our next meeting will be December 15th at 10 o'clock. We'll hear from EQ Tech on that day. And I'm assuming as we start the legislative session on January 4th, we'll probably hopefully get at least a January date in to entertain another presentation. But again, thank you to Michael Friel, Jim O'Brien from Wind Waste. Again, thank you to Deep for the monitoring of this going forward. And we'll see you in December, and have a good Thanksgiving.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to Gaia for running the show.
Thank you, Representative.